The bleeding maid stumbled through Castellano's door at 3:44 in the morning. 27 years old, but looking like life had aged her by decades. Aria Reynolds collapsed through the entrance, one eye swollen completely shut, the skin purple and black like a bruise that had learned to breathe. Handprint bruises dark as ink wrapped around her throat. Blood dripped from a gash above her eyebrow onto the white marble floor, one drop, then two, then three, each one leaving a small dark flower that bloomed and faded into the stone. Her worn coat was torn at the shoulder, revealing more bruises underneath, yellow and green and purple all layered like a map of violence. Snow and ice clung to her tangled brown hair. Her lips were split. Her hands trembled like they belonged to someone else entirely. The restaurant was nearly empty except for the private corner booth in the back where Alejandro Castellano sat with two men, all three in black suits that cost more than everything she owned. Rocco and Enzo, the lieutenants, had been discussing numbers on a small tablet. The candlelight flickered across their faces. Outside, the blizzard howled against the windows, visibility near zero, the kind of storm that swallowed the world whole. All three men went absolutely still. Aria's knees buckled. She steadied herself against the host stand, leaving a small smear of blood on the dark wood. Her breathing came in short, panic gasps. "Please," she said, her voice trembling like a candle in the wind. "Please, I need help. There's a man. Douglas Hale. He's coming for Emma. He's coming for her and I don't know where to go, I don't know who to trust, and he said if I told anyone." She pulled out 34 crumpled dollars from her coat pocket. All she had left. Every bill worn soft from handling, the corners bent and faded. She tried to hand them forward, her arm extending toward the restaurant owner, but it fell short. "I'll pay," she whispered. "Whatever it costs, I'll pay. Just protect her. Please. She's only 6. She doesn't deserve this." Alejandro Castellano rose slowly from his booth. 6'2", built like someone who had learned violence in a gymnasium and refined it through experience. Dark hair swept back from his forehead, silver threading at the temples like frost. A scar ran from his left eye down to his cheekbone, thin and pale, the kind that told a story nobody wanted to hear. His suit was tailored so precisely it seemed custom-made for the exact angle of his shoulders. Gold watch on his wrist. Silver rings on 2 fingers. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Rocco and Enzo exchanged a look that neither had seen in 15 years of working for Alejandro Castellano. The kind of look that meant something fundamental had shifted. The air in the restaurant changed. The candles seemed to burn brighter. "What is your name?" Alejandro's voice was deep and solid like an oath. Measured. Controlled. "Aria," she whispered. "Aria Reynolds. I'm a nanny. I was a nanny. I work at the Blackwell house, and Emma came to us 3 days ago. She was traumatized. She barely spoke. But she kept saying one word over and over. She kept saying Alejandro. She said Alejandro was coming to find her. She said." Aria's voice broke. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the blood on her chin. "She said her father would come. She said you would come." The silence that followed was absolute. The kind of silence that only exists in moments when the world stops turning and everyone holds their breath. Rocco set down the tablet with such careful precision that it made no sound at all. Alejandro moved toward her without hesitation. Each step deliberate, controlled, the way a man moves when he has learned to use his body as a weapon and has decided, in this moment, not to. He removed his suit jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The cashmere was warm and smelled like expensive cologne and winter air. "Sit," he said. It was not a request. She Saturday. Enzo was already on the phone, his voice low and urgent. "Get the car. Now. Bring the doctor. She's been beaten and she's in shock." Rocco stared at Alejandro with an expression somewhere between disbelief and something that might have been understanding. "Boss, what did she just?" "I know what she said," Alejandro replied. His jaw was clenched so tightly the scar on his cheek seemed to deepen. He pulled up a chair and sat directly across from Aria, his full attention on her like a spotlight that revealed everything. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Do not leave out a single detail. Aria's hands shook as she tried to hold them still. The Blackwells hired me 2 years ago. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell. They had one child, they said. A son named Marcus. But 3 days ago, a girl arrived at the house. She was dropped off by 2 men in black suits. Mrs. Blackwell, Evelyn, she seemed shocked to see the girl. She made a phone call. She said, "We agreed Emma would never come here. If anyone finds out about this, if anyone finds out what we did," but she didn't finish. She just put Emma in the nursery and locked the door. Alejandro's hands had curled into fists, but his voice remained level. What is Emma like? She's beautiful, Aria said. The words came easier now, words about a child instead of about violence. She has dark eyes like yours. And she's so brave. So brave for someone so small. The first night, I heard her crying. I went to her and she was having a nightmare. She was calling for her father. She was calling for you. I held her. I didn't know who you were, but I held her because she was terrified and alone and nobody else would go to her. Rocco exchanged another look with Enzo. This one meant something entirely different. I stayed with her every night after that, Aria continued. I told her stories. I sang to her. I gave her the only thing I had that was soft, an old pair of children's shoes I kept. My mother gave them to me when I was born. I gave them to Emma. I told her they were magic shoes and as long as she had them, she would never be alone. She slept holding them every night. Alejandro's hand slowly unclenched. When he spoke, his voice was different. Quieter. Like something had cracked inside him and was leaking out slowly. Where is she now? The Blackwell house, Aria said. But Mr. Hale, Douglas Hale, he found out that Emma was missing from wherever they were keeping her before. He came to the house tonight. He said if I didn't tell him where she was, he would burn the house down with everyone inside. I fought him. I tried to keep him away from the nursery. He beat me. He choked me. And then I ran. I took the money I'd been saving and I ran and I drove until I found this place and the front door of the restaurant exploded inward. Wind and snow poured through the entrance like the blizzard had gotten tired of waiting outside. 2 figures stood silhouetted against the white darkness, both in dark coats, both moving with the casual confidence of men accustomed to violence. Douglas Hale was older, maybe 55, with a face that had learned cruelty from experience and worn it well. Scar tissue on his knuckles. Eyes like a shark that had learned to smile. He scanned the restaurant and his gaze landed on Aria like a predator finding wounded prey. There you are, he said. His voice was like venom. Stupid, stupid girl. You think you can run from me? You think anyone is going to protect you? I own 3 police chiefs in this city. I own judges. I own. Alejandro stood. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The candles seemed to dim. You own nothing, Alejandro said. His voice was like thunder, deep and rolling and impossible to ignore. You own nothing that matters. And you have exactly 30 seconds to leave this restaurant before I show you what you actually own. Which is nothing. Not your freedom. Not your life. Not a single breath that does not come from my permission. Douglas Hale's confidence flickered for just a moment. Just long enough for him to realize that the man standing before him was not a restaurant owner. That the 2 men behind him were not employees. That the black SUVs he could see pulling up outside through the windows were not coincidence. He turned and walked back out into the blizzard. Rocco moved before Enzo could speak. He was on his phone, his voice rapid and precise, giving orders that would echo through the city for days. Aria stared at Alejandro. Her hand reached out and touched his sleeve. Why, she whispered. Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. Alejandro looked down at her, and for just a moment, his expression shifted. The hardness cracked. Something underneath that was entirely human looked out. Because, he said, my daughter called for me for 6 years and I never heard it. Because somewhere in this city, there is a 6-year-old girl holding a pair of magic shoes and waiting for the father she has never met. Because you chose to protect her when you could have run. And because everyone in this city needs to learn that there is a line, and the moment they cross it, everything they own becomes mine to destroy. He extended his hand to Aria. Come, he said. We are going to get Emma. And we are going to bring her home. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside Castellano's restaurant, something had broken open in the darkness. Something that had been locked away for 7 years. Something that was finally coming home. The door closed behind them. The candles burned steadily, their flames like small prayers nobody had spoken aloud. 3 days before Aria Reynolds stumbled bleeding into Castellano's restaurant, she woke in darkness at 5:19 in the morning. Her alarm, a cracked phone screen displaying 5:30 in pale green numbers, sat on a shelf above her head. The room was a converted closet in the Blackwell Mansion's east wing, 6 feet wide and 8 feet long, with no window and barely enough space to turn around. A twin mattress, a 3-drawer plastic dresser, and 1 metal shelf holding everything she owned. 3 shirts. 2 pairs of jeans. A bra with a broken strap she had knotted back together. Socks with holes darned with thread that didn't quite match. She lay still for 3 seconds, gathering the strength to move, because getting out of bed meant another day of cleaning a 12,000 square foot mansion on $1,800 a month while her own life fit inside 6 feet by 8 feet of borrowed space. The mansion around her was waking up. She could hear the shower running in the master bedroom 2 floors above. The coffee maker humming in the kitchen. The faint sound of the television in the front sitting room, already on because Evelyn Blackwell never truly slept, just dozed in expensive silk and woke up furious that the world had continued without her. Aria pulled on her uniform, black pants, white blouse, black shoes buffed to a shine that took 20 minutes every night, and braided her dark hair into a tight bun. She caught sight of herself in the mirror above the dresser. 26 years old but looking like someone who had lived twice that long. Her eyes were hollow. Her skin had gone grey from years of working nights at a diner before this job, double shifts, tips stiffed by men who grabbed her wrist and made promises their wives would never know about. The skin under her eyes had developed permanent shadows, like bruises that never healed. She touched the shelf above her bed. Her finger found the small object there, wrapped in faded tissue paper. A child's first pair of shoes. Size 2. Soft pink leather with white laces. She had kept them for 3 years, ever since the night a 4-year-old girl named Lucia had arrived at the Sacred Heart Women's Shelter wearing nothing but a hospital gown and nightmares, and Aria had held her while she screamed. The shoes were all Lucia had left when her mother finally came to reclaim her, a symbol that even the smallest people could leave footprints, could take steps forward, could eventually run toward something better. Aria did not open the tissue. She just touched the package like it was a prayer. Then she went downstairs to the kitchen. The Blackwell Mansion occupied 12,000 square feet on Seattle's Capitol Hill. The kitchen alone was larger than the entire apartment where Aria had lived before this job. Marble countertops. A 6-burner range. A refrigerator that cost more than her annual salary. She started the water for the twins' breakfast oatmeal, organic, no sugar, no flavor, because Evelyn believed that suffering built character even in 4-year-olds. At 6:51 a.m., the children appeared. Jackson and Claire. Ages 6 and 4. Blonde, expensive-looking, dressed in clothes that had been ironed by Aria at 11 p.m. the night before. They climbed onto the breakfast stools without greeting her. They had learned early that Aria was staff, not family. She was the woman who made sure their clothes were clean and their hair was braided and their homework was completed. She was not someone who hugged them. She was not someone who belonged. "Your mother wants you to wear the navy cardigans today," Aria said, setting the oatmeal in front of them. Not the grey ones. Jackson, the older one, nodded without looking at her. Claire pushed the bowl away. I don't like this kind, she said. This is the only kind we have today. I want the kind with the berries. Aria had spent $28 on groceries that week. $28 to feed 2 children and work her way through the house for 5 days. The berries had cost 5 of those dollars, and Evelyn had eaten them with her Thursday morning smoothie, the one she paid Aria an extra $2 to blend with expensive protein powder and wheatgrass that smelled like cut grass soaked in desperation. I'm sorry, Aria said. The berries are finished. Claire pushed the bowl onto the floor. It didn't break. Aria had learned years ago to use the unbreakable ones, but oatmeal splattered across the marble like a small disaster that would somehow be Aria's fault. She cleaned it up. She did not speak. She had learned that speaking back to children who belonged to powerful families got you fired, and being fired meant losing the room, the roof, the only stability she had found in 6 years of trying to survive Seattle's predatory rental market on wages that had not increased since 2019. At 8 a.m., Evelyn Blackwell appeared in the kitchen. She was 42 years old but maintained herself with the precision of someone at war with time. Her hair was the color of spun platinum and styled in a way that required a salon every 2 weeks. She wore a white silk blouse with pearl buttons and jewelry that caught the morning light like scattered diamonds. Her hands were manicured. Her nails were filed into perfect points. She wore a gold watch that cost more than everything Aria owned. The twins' room, Evelyn said without greeting. I found dust on the bookshelf. I'll clean it immediately. I pay you $1,800 a month, Miss Reynolds. That is a generous wage. I expect perfection for that generosity. Aria nodded. She did not point out that $1,800 a month, after the room rental to the Blackwells, after the bus pass, after groceries, left her with approximately $34 in her bank account at any given time. She did not mention that she worked from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. most days, and that perfection was difficult to maintain on that schedule with that budget and that soul-crushing exhaustion. I understand, Mrs. Blackwell. Evelyn selected a piece of organic fruit from the bowl, one of the berries Claire had wanted, and left the kitchen. The children watched her go with the careful attention of small creatures who had learned that their mother's moods affected their survival. Then they looked at Aria, waiting for her to make things right again. She would spend the next 11 hours making things right. Cleaning. Organizing. Cooking meals that satisfied no one. Ironing uniforms for school. Helping with homework. Giving baths. Reading bedtime stories in a voice that tried to sound warm even though she was dissolving inside like sugar in water. At 6:53 p.m., when Mrs. Chen texted her, "Come tonight if you can. We have someone new." She won't talk to anyone. Aria felt something in her chest crack open. She told Evelyn she was going to the market. It was a lie. Evelyn did not care if Aria lied. Evelyn only cared that dinner was cooked and laundry was folded and the dust stayed off the furniture. The Sacred Heart Women's Shelter occupied a renovated brownstone on Pine Street in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. Aria had been volunteering there for 3 years, ever since she had seen the listing on Craigslist and realized that she could spend 2 evenings a week with people whose lives were worse than hers, which somehow made her own life feel less hopeless. The shelter took in women fleeing domestic violence, trafficking situations, and homelessness. They had beds for 8. They had a kitchen where the women could cook. They had a counselor on staff and a lawyer who worked pro bono on custody cases and housing petitions. Mrs. Chen was waiting for her at the door. She was 68 years old and had been running the shelter for 19 years. Her face carried the weight of 10,000 stories, and at 6:55 p.m., when Aria arrived, that weight had deepened into something close to fear. "Aria, I'm glad you're here," Mrs. Chen said, pulling her inside quickly as if the November rain outside might follow them in. She arrived this morning. A caseworker brought her from Seattle General. She's been assessed for trafficking indicators and she meets all of them. Malnourished. Bruised. Showing signs of severe trauma. She won't speak to anyone. Not me. Not the nurses. Not the other children. I've tried everything. But you have a way with the scared ones. They climbed the stairs to the second floor. The shelter was quiet except for the sound of rain against the windows and the low murmur of a television in the common room. The hallway smelled like cleaning solution and something like hope, which Aria had learned was mostly just the smell of people trying very hard. The girl was in the back bedroom, the one with yellow walls and a bed with a quilt that had been donated by a church. She sat in the far corner, her small frame curled against the wall, her dark hair hanging in front of her face. She was holding a stuffed rabbit that had been loved so much it was coming apart at the seams. The girl did not look up when they entered. "Emma," Mrs. Chen said softly. "This is Aria. She's going to stay with you for a little while, okay?" The girl named Emma did not respond. Aria walked to the opposite side of the room and sat down on the floor, 3 feet away. She did not reach toward the girl. She did not make eye contact. She simply sat in the same room and breathed in the same air and waited. 1 minute passed. Then 5. Then 10. The rain continued against the windows. Outside, Seattle stretched across its 7 hills in the November darkness, full of people living full lives, walking past each other on sidewalks, buying coffee, going home to families who chose them on purpose. The girl moved. Slightly. Her hand, the one not holding the rabbit, extended just far enough to touch the floor between them. Still not reaching toward Aria, but acknowledging her presence. Saying without words, "I know you are here." Aria waited another 3 minutes. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, the kind of voice you use when you are talking to something that might startle and disappear forever. "Do you have a favorite color?" The girl did not answer. But her shoulders, which had been rigid with fear, relaxed just slightly. "I have a favorite color," Aria continued. "It's blue. Like the ocean before a storm. Dark and kind of scary but also beautiful. What's your favorite?" Another long silence. Then, so quietly that Aria almost missed it, a single word emerged from the girl like something that had been locked away and was only now finding its way out. "Pink." They sat together as the rain fell outside. Aria began to talk, very slowly and very gently, about pink things. Pink flowers. Pink sunsets. Pink shoes. The girl listened, and something in her small frame began to soften like ice melting at the edges. At 7:42 p.m., after 23 minutes of sitting in that corner, the girl spoke again. One word. A name that would echo through everything that came after. Alejandro. Aria's heart stopped. "Is that someone you love?" she asked. The girl nodded, tears beginning to trace down her small face like rivers on a map of somewhere she could no longer reach. Aria made a promise in that moment, silently, to the universe or God or whatever force had led her to this room. She would protect this child. She would keep her safe. She would find out who Alejandro was and if he could be found. She would pour everything she had into making sure this girl felt loved, felt claimed, felt like she belonged to someone. What Aria did not know was that Douglas Hale had been watching the shelter for 3 days. What Aria did not know was that Emma was not a runaway or an abandoned child, but a stolen one. A daughter taken at birth by enemies who wanted to wound a man in the deepest place a man could be wounded. At 9:23 p.m., as Aria was braiding Emma's hair in the shelter's bathroom, preparing her for bed, a shadow moved past the back window of the building. Slow. Deliberate. The shadow of someone studying the layout of the rooms, counting the exits, measuring the distance between the girl and the door. The rain drummed against the glass. Inside, Emma whispered her fears into the darkness. Outside, the predator watched and waited and began to plan. The snow fell heavy and thick across Seattle's Westlake Avenue at 11:34 on a Friday night, the kind of snow that muffled sound, that made the world feel smaller and colder and like nowhere safe existed anymore. Aria Reynolds walked with her hands jammed deep in the pockets of a coat that had belonged to someone else 3 owners ago, her breath coming in small clouds of vapor, her mind still wrapped around the sound of Emma's voice whispering that name like a prayer. Alejandro. She did not know what it meant. She did not know it would change everything. The black van pulled alongside her so smoothly, so casually, that at first she thought it was just another car passing through the frozen night. But it slowed. And slowed. And then it stopped, diagonal across the sidewalk in front of her, blocking her path forward like a sentence with no way around it. The door opened. Douglas Hale stepped out into the snow, and the temperature of the entire street seemed to drop another 15 degrees. He was 6'2", built like a fortress made of cruelty and cigarette smoke, his head shaved to gleaming, a snake tattoo crawling up the right side of his neck like it was trying to escape his skin. His eyes were the color of a dead ocean, empty and cold and containing absolutely no flicker of anything human. He wore a leather jacket over a black shirt, and when he moved toward her, each step was deliberate, measured, the movement of something that had already decided what came next. "You got something that belongs to me, sweetheart," he said. His voice was like venom poured over glass. Aria's blood turned to ice. She did not think. She ran. But Hale was faster. His hand closed around her arm like a vice, and he yanked her sideways, pulling her into the alley behind the abandoned warehouse on the corner, the one with the broken windows and the smell of stale urine and rust. The snow swallowed them both. The street was empty. There were no witnesses. "The girl," Hale hissed, slamming her against the brick wall. His breath reeked of cigarettes and whiskey, thick and choking. "Emma. Where is she?" Aria's ribs screamed. She gasped for air that would not come. "I don't know what you're talking about." His fist connected with her eye socket. Stars exploded across her vision like fireworks in a nightmare. Pain bloomed white and blinding, consuming everything. She felt her vision tilt, her balance shatter, the world spinning around her like she was drowning in air. "I run 40 girls across 3 states, Hale growled, his voice dropping to something worse than anger, something that sounded like satisfaction. 40 girls. You think one bleeding heart nanny can stop me? You think you can hide what's mine?" His hand wrapped around her throat. He lifted her against the brick wall like she weighed nothing, like she was a doll, like she was already a ghost. Her feet left the ground. Her fingers clawed at his wrist, but his grip was iron, was nothing, was the end of everything. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Her lungs screamed. She could not breathe. Could not speak. Could not do anything but choke. One more second and she would pass out. One more second after that and she would not wake up. But in that moment, suspended between consciousness and the dark, Aria remembered. She remembered the tiny shoes in her closet, the first shoes Emma had worn at the shelter, shoes Aria had saved because they felt like proof that this child was real, was worth protecting, was worth dying for. She remembered every child she had ever held. Every small hand that had trusted her. Every moment she had chosen to stay when she could have walked away. And she drove her knee up hard. Air exploded out of Hale's lungs. His grip on her throat loosened just enough. She gasped, choking, tearing herself free and running into the blizzard without looking back, her eye already swelling shut, her throat blooming with fingerprint bruises that looked like someone had tried to erase her from existence. She ran for 17 blocks through the empty streets, leaving blood drops in the snow like a trail of breadcrumbs no one would follow. Her ribs felt broken. Her head throbbed where it had cracked against brick. One eye would not open. But she ran because stopping meant dying, and dying meant Emma had no one. The wind tore at her like a blade wrapped in ice. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, some other body that had not been used up and destroyed. She had no phone. No car. $34 in her pocket, and that was all that stood between her and absolute nothing. And then through the wall of snow, she saw it. Warm light spilling from a window. A sign reading Castellanos in scrolling gold letters. The upscale Italian restaurant on 4th Avenue, the place she had walked past 100 times, never daring to enter, knowing that restaurants like that existed in a world completely separate from hers, a world where people spent more on a single meal than she spent on food in a month. The windows glowed amber and gold, and inside she could see candlelight dancing on white tablecloths, could see the shadow of movement, could see warmth. She did not think about whether she belonged there. She did not think about anything except Emma's voice, except the promise she had made in the dark, except the fact that Douglas Hale was still out there and she had no way to stop him. She pushed open the door at 3:47 in the morning. The warmth hit her like a physical force. The smell of tomato sauce and oregano and fresh basil wrapped around her. The soft gleam of candlelight caught her in the entryway, caught the blood on her face, caught the collapse that was already happening because her body had finally understood that she was safe, that she could stop running, that gravity had just been given permission to take her down. She stumbled forward one more step. And Alejandro Castellano, sitting at his regular corner booth with a glass of wine untouched in front of him and ledgers spread across the table, rose to his feet and crossed the restaurant floor in 4 long strides. He caught her before she hit the ground. For a moment, there was only the shock of being held. The texture of his suit jacket against her cheek, rough and expensive, a fabric that cost more than she made in 3 months. The warmth of his hands on her back, steady and strong and careful, like he was holding something that might break. The sound of his breathing, deep and controlled, a man trained to remain calm no matter what catastrophe was unfolding in front of him. "Rocco." "Lock the doors," Alejandro said, and his voice was like thunder spoken softly, dangerous and absolute. The doors clicked shut with the sound of deadbolts engaging. He carried her to the back, to his private booth, and set her down gently on leather seats that felt like clouds after months of sleeping on a cot in the shelter's basement. Enzo appeared with first aid supplies, clean cloths, antiseptic, gauze, moving with the efficiency of a man who had done this before, who had learned how to treat violence the way a baker learned recipes. Rocco stood guard at the door, one hand inside his jacket where his weapon lived, his eyes scanning the street outside like he was waiting for the next threat to materialize. Alejandro knelt in front of her. The room went completely silent. "In 15 years, I have never seen him kneel for anyone," Enzo whispered to Rocco, his voice barely audible, reverent and shocked like he was witnessing something impossible. Alejandro's hands were gentle as he cleaned the blood from her forehead, careful not to touch the swollen socket where her eye was already disappearing beneath purple and black bruising. His face was composed, controlled, but his jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle working beneath his skin. "Who did this to you?" His voice was surprisingly soft, like he was asking a child what frightened them in the dark. Aria's one good eye focused on him through the haze of pain. "Douglas Hale. He's a trafficker. He wants Emma back." Alejandro's entire body went rigid. His hand stilled on her face. His breathing changed. Something shifted in the air around him, a current of electricity, a gathering of storm clouds, a dangerous man becoming something more dangerous still. "Tell me about Emma," he said, and each word was clipped, controlled, a man holding himself together by the thinnest thread. Through tears and pain and the shock of being safe, Aria told him everything. The 6-year-old girl who had arrived at Sacred Heart Shelter 3 days ago, traumatized and silent, her clothes torn, her small body bearing marks no child should bear. She told him about the moment Emma had finally spoken, about the single word whispered like a prayer into the darkness. She told him about dark hair, brown eyes, a birthmark on the left shoulder shaped like a crescent moon, about braiding that hair, about singing, about promising to keep her safe. Alejandro stood abruptly. He walked to the window and gripped the frame so hard the wood creaked beneath his hands, his knuckles turning white with the force of whatever he was holding back, whatever was trying to tear its way out of his chest. "Boss?" Rocco stepped forward, uncertainty crossing his face. In all the years they had worked together, he had learned to read Alejandro's moods like a sailor reads the sky. But this was something new, something raw, something that looked like the world was breaking inside him. "Emma is my daughter," Alejandro said, his voice barely controlled, a man speaking from the bottom of a canyon. "Stolen from the hospital 7 years ago by the Volkov family, the night my brother Marco betrayed us and sold our locations to our enemies. They took her to punish me. To destroy me." He turned back to Aria. "You protected my daughter." The words hung in the air like a benediction, like a sentence, like the moment everything changed. Enzo looked at Rocco. Rocco looked away, his jaw tight, understanding flooding his features. 7 years. 7 years of their boss searching, of money poured into investigations, of a man who had built an empire with ice water in his veins and nothing except grief in his heart, because grief was the only thing that could compare to the cold. My brother owed the Volkov syndicate $470,000, Alejandro continued, his voice steady now, clinical, the voice of a man recounting facts that had destroyed him. Gambling debts. Addiction. He came to me asking for mercy. I gave him survival instead. I negotiated with the Volkovs. They wanted leverage. They wanted a way to wound me, to make sure I understood the cost of betraying our agreement. So they took Emma from her crib the night she was born. They told me I would never find her, that she would grow up knowing nothing about me, about our family, about what was ours. He looked at Aria with eyes that had seen the bottom of despair and decided to climb back anyway. I have spent 7 years searching. $2,300,000 in private investigators. Every lead, every rumor, every whisper. And it took a stranger, a woman with nothing, sleeping in the basement of a shelter for $50 a week, to do what all my power could not. You protected her. Aria tried to stand. Her ribs screamed in protest. Alejandro's hand came to her shoulder, gentle, holding her in place. I have to go back, she said. She's alone. She's scared. You're not going anywhere until you're healed, Alejandro said. My men will bring Emma here. She'll be safe. They will not stop anyone. They will not hesitate. Emma is no longer alone. Aria resisted, pulling away from the comfort of the booth, from the safety that was being offered. Why would you help me? I'm nobody. I have $34 to my name. I can't pay you back. I'm nobody. Alejandro's expression softened in a way his men had never witnessed before, in a way that looked like the thawing of ice, like the beginning of spring in a man made of winter. You already paid a debt you didn't owe, he said. You protected a stranger's child with your life. That's not nothing. That's everything. At 4:52 in the morning, Rocco and Enzo left to retrieve Emma from Sacred Heart Shelter, moving with the quiet efficiency of men who understood that every second mattered, that a child's safety was the only currency that meant anything. Alejandro sat across from Aria in the booth, watching her like she was a miracle he did not quite believe in, like she might disappear if he looked away. She asked, "What will you do to Hale?" Alejandro's voice turned to ice, to nothing, to the absence of mercy. He's already dead, he said. He just doesn't know it yet. The rain began to fall outside, gentle and steady, each drop hitting the window like a question no one could answer. At that same hour, 3 blocks away in a warehouse that smelled like oil and rust and the particular desperation of men who had already lost everything, Douglas Hale was loading weapons into a duffel bag, 6 armed men standing behind him, each one understanding what came next. He snarled into the darkness, "Nobody takes what's mine." The snow fell harder now, each flake dissolving against the window like a prayer no one was answering. Aria stood in the upstairs apartment, her body a map of bruises, her hands trembling as she held the tiny shoes, worn leather, a size too small, scuffed at the heel where a child's foot had dragged through concrete. 3 years she had carried these shoes. 3 years. Emma slept in the bedroom beyond, her breathing soft and steady, the sound of a child who finally felt safe. Aria looked down at the shoes and thought about tomorrow. About the streets. About being invisible again. She pulled out the $34 from her pocket and spread them on the window ledge. 120, 2 5s, for singles. All of it. Everything she had in the world. The converted closet apartment was already gone, she'd missed rent on the 15th. Her job at the shelter had ended the moment she protected Emma instead of handing her over. And now she was here, in a restaurant booth, talking to a man who moved like shadows moved, who spoke in sentences that sounded like decisions had already been made. He didn't need her anymore. Emma was safe. The job was done. Aria's chest tightened. Who was she fooling? Alejandro Castellano didn't keep broken maids in his restaurants. He had armies of people to do his bidding. Tomorrow he would arrange for her placement somewhere, a job, maybe, if she was lucky, some small position where she would be grateful and quiet and invisible. Exactly what she'd been her whole life. The shoes fell from her fingers. They hit the floor with barely a sound. Emma stirred in the dark. "Aria?" The word was small, confused, the voice of a child surfacing from sleep. Not a question. A confirmation. "Is this real? Are you here?" Aria moved instantly, crossing the darkness, finding the small form in the bed. Emma's hand reached out and gripped Aria's shirt, holding it like it was the only solid thing in a world made of fog. "I'm here," Aria whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Emma's breathing slowed. She drifted back toward sleep, her hand still fisted in Aria's sleeve. Aria sat on the edge of the bed and did not move. She would not move. Not tonight. Not for anyone. Downstairs, the clock on the dining room wall read 7:41. The back entrance exploded inward. Douglas Hale moved through the kitchen like a storm given a body, broad-shouldered, 53 years old, his face scarred from a knife fight in Atlantic City when he was young and thought violence could solve everything. It still could. Behind him came 6 men, all of them armed, all of them understanding that this was the end of something, the point where you either walked out richer or you didn't walk out at all. Hale had a Glock 9mm in his right hand. The safety was already off. The main dining room held 8 men total. Alejandro sat in his corner booth, a glass of red wine untouched in front of him, as still as a monument. Rocco and Enzo flanked the kitchen entrance. 4 additional men stood at the bar, dressed in dark suits that cost more than most people made in a month. Hale raised the weapon. "Castellano!" His voice cracked like a whip across the silence. "Give me the girl and the bitch who took her, and maybe I let you live. Maybe I burn this whole place down and you get to walk out on your own feet instead of being carried." The restaurant held its breath. Even the candles seemed to pause in their flickering. Alejandro rose from his booth with the unhurried grace of a man who had never needed to rush toward anything. He was tall, 6'1", broad across the shoulders, his tailored charcoal suit showing the white of his open shirt, a gold watch catching the light as he moved. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, a permanent reminder of a betrayal that had cost him 7 years. His eyes were dark, fathomless, the color of water at midnight. "You walked into my restaurant," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath that could not be broken. "You threatened my family. You've made your last mistake." Hale laughed. It was the sound of a man who still believed in his own power, who still thought fear was a currency that could be spent. "Your family? That bleeding heart nanny? She's nobody." Silence crashed down like a blade. "She's everything," Alejandro said. He raised his hand. One small gesture. One nod. 12 men in black tactical gear moved from the shadows like ghosts becoming solid. They materialized from behind the bar, from the kitchen, from the doorways that had been positioned hours earlier, waiting in the dark with the patience of wolves. They moved in coordinated silence, no shouting, no warning, just absolute and devastating efficiency. Hale's 6 men never had a chance to raise their weapons. In 43 seconds, they were disarmed, forced to the ground, restrained with plastic ties that bit into their wrists. Their Glocks and knives were collected with the care of someone handling sacred objects. Hale himself was tackled by Rocco, his gun flying from his hand and skittering across the black and white checkered floor. He slammed into the wall face first, and the sound of his nose breaking was loud enough to echo. He collapsed onto his knees, trembling, breathing in short gasps like a cornered animal. "Wait, wait," he gasped. Blood poured from his nose, dripping onto his expensive suit jacket. "We can make a deal. I have money. I have information. I know things about your operations, about." Alejandro walked toward him with the measured pace of a general surveying a battlefield. He crouched down until his eyes were level with Hale's face. Up close, Hale could see the scar more clearly, could see the complete absence of mercy in those dark eyes, could see the moment his life ended. "You put your hands on her," Alejandro said quietly. "You tried to take my daughter. There is no deal. There is no mercy. There is only the consequence of your choices." He stood and looked at Enzo. The Volkov family has been looking for the man who stole their shipment last month. The one that cost them $3 million. Deliver Mr. Hale to them. Let them know he's a gift from us. Let them know he's all theirs. Hale's face drained to white. His entire body went rigid. "No. No, please, they'll kill me. They'll do worse," Alejandro said. "Much, much worse. And you'll have a very long time to think about every woman you've hurt. Every girl whose life you destroyed. Every family you tore apart. You'll think about it every single day for the rest of your life." Hale was dragged away screaming, his voice dissolving into the sound of the storm outside, into the wind, into the absolute dark. He was loaded into a black SUV that pulled away from the restaurant with no lights, no sirens, just the sound of tires on wet pavement. He would never be seen again. Not alive. Not intact. Not in any way that would allow recognition. Justice had been delivered. Not through the legal system. Not through courts and juries and lawyers who charged $300 an hour. But delivered nonetheless, handed to a rival family with a quiet understanding between men who lived outside the law. 20 minutes later, Alejandro climbed the stairs to the apartment where Aria and Emma waited in the dark. The next morning arrived cold and grey. At 6:47 a.m., federal agents in dark windbreakers stood outside the Blackwell mansion in the Mercer Island Hills, a house worth $1 million, surrounded by gardens that cost more to maintain than most people's yearly salaries. They knocked on the door with the kind of knock that meant everything was ending. Evelyn Blackwell answered in her silk robe, her blonde hair perfectly styled even at dawn, her face showing only the slightest confusion at the appearance of uniforms. She was 61 years old but looked a decade younger through the miracle of injections and surgeries paid for with blood money. Her hands had never done work a day in her life. Her nails were manicured. Her jewelry was real. "Mrs. Blackwell, you're under arrest for tax evasion, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering," the lead agent said. His voice was mechanical. He'd done this before. Evelyn's face collapsed. "This is a mistake. I know people. I have lawyers. My husband is. Your husband is cooperating with this investigation," the agent said. "He's already agreed to testify against you in exchange for reduced sentencing." The handcuffs were already out. The metal clicked around her wrists. Cold. Efficient. Real. She was led out of her mansion in front of her neighbors, in front of the cameras that had somehow already assembled, in front of the news vans with their satellite dishes and reporters who had gotten word of something extraordinary. Evelyn Blackwell, president of the Seattle Women's Auxiliary, host of charity galas, friend to senators and judges, was arrested on her own front lawn. Her face was everywhere by noon. Her shame was public. Systemic. Irreversible. 15 years in federal prison awaited her. Not the comfortable prison with the white-collar criminals and the prison camps where you played tennis. But a real prison. A hard prison. A place where the guards didn't care who you were before. Alejandro had made a single phone call to a federal prosecutor who owed him a favor. He had handed over documents his investigators had compiled over months, files so damning, so meticulously organized, that there was no defense possible. The Blackwell family's illegal business dealings, the laundering operations, the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, all of it laid bare in the kind of detail that meant someone had been watching for a very long time. Her wealth evaporated. Her standing collapsed. Her reputation burned away like paper in fire. Both villains were broken. Neither through quick violence. Neither through death, which would have been too merciful. But through systematic, patient, absolute destruction. They would spend years in cells, thinking about choices made, thinking about the moment they decided that power mattered more than humanity. They would think about it every single day. Upstairs in the restaurant apartment, Aria held Emma while the child slept, and neither of them knew yet that everything was already changing. Neither of them knew that this night, this moment, this small act of holding each other was the night when the entire story pivoted. When invisible became seen. When nobody became everything. The snow continued to fall outside, each flake dissolving against glass like time itself was dissolving, making way for something new. 3 months had passed since the night Aria Reynolds stumbled through Castellano's door bleeding and desperate. The blizzard was gone. The bruises were fading. The woman who now stood in the doorway of her safe apartment on March 14 at 7:15 p.m. bore almost no resemblance to the girl who had arrived at Alejandro's restaurant half dead. Almost. The apartment was small, 3 rooms on the 4th floor of a building 3 blocks from the restaurant. Rent-free. Alejandro had offered to pay for everything. Aria had refused 14 times. She worked now as a live-in nanny for the Hendersons, a family in Queen and who treated her like a person instead of a servant. $2,400 a month. For the first time in her adult life, she was building something that belonged to her. Not charity. Not survival. Choice. She stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes when the knock came. 7:15. Every Wednesday. Alejandro never varied the time by a single minute. She opened the door. He stood in the hallway holding a container from the restaurant, his dark coat dusted with March rain. Tall. Broad-shouldered. The scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone catching the hallway light. But something in his face had softened since December. The hardness was still there. The power was still there. But now there was something else underneath, something that watched her like a question he didn't know how to ask. Pappardelle, he said. The cook made it fresh at 5 o'clock. You didn't have to bring dinner every week. I know. He never offered explanations. He simply appeared, brought food, sat for an hour, and left. Emma came sometimes, sitting between them on the worn couch, drawing pictures of horses and houses and a family standing together holding hands. Aria never asked what the pictures meant. She understood. In April, the heater broke. Cold seeped into the apartment like a curse. Aria called 3 repair shops. All of them wanted money up front. $75 for the service call alone. She was saving for community college tuition. She could not afford to be cold, but she could not afford to be warm either. On Wednesday at 7:15, Alejandro arrived with a toolbox. What are you doing? Fixing it. You don't fix heaters. I fix things that belong to me. I'm not yours. He met her eyes. I know. He worked for 40 minutes while Emma colored on the floor and Aria sat in the kitchen unable to move. The sound of metal against metal. His breathing steady, patient. When he finished, warm air poured from the vents like a benediction. Thank you, she whispered. You're welcome. He left an hour later, and Aria sat in the warmth and cried because someone had finally shown her that kindness did not require payment. May arrived with longer days and rain that fell like a second language. Aria had begun community college classes at night. Early childhood education. She wanted to build a shelter for children, a real one, not the cramped refuge she had worked in before. Somewhere with light. Somewhere with hope. One morning in late May, she found books on her doorstep. 12 of them. Stacked in a cardboard box. Titles about trauma and healing, about how children recover from violence, about building resilient systems. A note was tucked inside, for your studies. You'll know how to use these better than anyone. Aria recognized the handwriting from the legal document she'd seen him sign at the restaurant. She called him that evening. Why are you doing this? Because your work matters. My work is studying while working 2 jobs. Exactly, he said, and hung up. By June, Aria had saved $3,200. Her eye had healed completely. The finger marks around her throat had faded to invisible. She was standing straighter. Sleeping better. The woman who had been nobody was becoming someone again. On a Wednesday in late June at 8:34 p.m., she walked into Castellano's restaurant without calling first. The place was quiet, the dinner rush finished. Emma ran from the back office and wrapped her arms around Aria's legs, nearly knocking her over. "Vivi! Vivi! Look what Papa drew! It's a dragon protecting a princess!" Aria knelt down and examined the crayon drawing, a fierce red dragon with a girl standing beside it smiling. She looked over Emma's head at Alindro, who sat at his corner booth reading contracts, gold watch catching the candlelight. He looked up. The moment their eyes met, something in his chest seemed to shift. "Can I talk to you?" Aria asked. He set down his papers immediately. She sat across from him without waiting for invitation. "We need to talk about why you won't let me pay rent. About why you show up every Wednesday like clockwork. About why you keep bringing me things. About why you look at me like..." She stopped. "Like what?" His voice was deep, steady, solid like an oath. "Like I matter." The silence stretched until it had weight. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. In the kitchen, someone dropped a pan. The sound echoed and faded. "I want the truth," Aria said. "Not kindness. Truth." Alindro set his hands flat on the table. "Because when you walked through that door bleeding and desperate, you reminded me that goodness still exists. Because you saved my daughter when you had nothing. Because you're the bravest person I've ever met. Because I've spent 7 years thinking I was broken beyond repair, and then you proved me wrong." He paused. The next words came like a confession pulled from stone. "Because I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know how to stop." Aria's breath caught. The room tilted slightly. "I'm a maid," she said. "You're a mafia boss. This doesn't make sense. Nothing about us makes sense. And yet here we are." She stood. Emma watched from across the restaurant, her small face serious, understanding something wordless passing between the adults. "Ask me again," Aria said, "when I've finished rebuilding my life. When I stand as your equal, not as someone you saved. When I'm not grateful for basic kindness. Ask me then." She turned and left the restaurant. The December rain began falling outside as Alindro sat alone, Emma already asleep in the apartment upstairs, understanding that some forms of love require the person to choose themselves first. The months that followed were quieter. Wednesdays still came. Dinner still arrived. But something had shifted into waiting. Into respect. Into the slow, patient knowledge that the greatest love is the kind that allows the other person to become whole. In December, exactly 1 year after the blizzard, Aria walked across the stage at Seattle Central College to receive her diploma. The auditorium was nearly full. When they called her name, the applause was scattered and polite. Then a voice from the back, "That's my hero." Emma stood on her seat, clapping wildly, her small hands bright with joy. Next to her, Alindro stood too. Rocco and Enzo. The restaurant staff. A dozen people who had become her family. Aria stopped mid-stage, tears streaming, laughing and crying at once. Outside in the cold December air after the ceremony, Alindro approached her. He held a small velvet box. Inside were tiny child shoes, bronzed, preserved, mounted on a wooden plaque. The MacGuffin she had carried for years. The shoes Emma wore the first day she arrived at the shelter. Engraved beneath, "For the woman who taught me that family is not bound by blood, but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives." Aria looked up at him, vision blurred. "You kept them," she whispered. "You left them behind the night I moved you to the apartment. I've been holding on to them, waiting for the right moment." She laughed. "That's the cheesiest thing I've ever heard." "I know. I love it. I know." Emma held both their hands between them, the three of them standing in falling snow, the same snow that had once fallen like a curse now falling like a blessing. Are you ready now? Alejandro asked quietly. Do you stand as my equal? Aria looked at him. The feared Mafia boss. The man who had broken empires. The father who read bedtime stories in silly voices. The man who fixed her heater and brought dinner every Wednesday for a year. She nodded. Yes. I'm ready. Ask me. Aria Reynolds, will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you matter? That you're not nobody? That you're everything. She kissed him right there on the college lawn, in front of everyone, Emma cheering between them, the snow falling like time itself was dissolving, making way for something new. Family is not always bound by blood. Sometimes it is bound by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Aria came to Castellano's door with nothing but $34 and a refusal to let a child suffer alone. She didn't know she was saving a Mafia boss's daughter. She didn't know she would find everything she lost. She just knew that goodness mattered. That love demanded to be fought for. That invisible people deserved to be seen. If this story moved you, if Aria's journey touched your heart, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to believe that kindness still exists. Subscribe so you never miss a story that will break you open and put you back together again. Go out there and be someone's reason to stay. Be the person who walks through the storm. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. After the rain, the sky clears. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.